Willy, a celebrated Parisian writer, journeyed year after year to the countryside to see his beloved Colette, a young woman whose beauty had bewitched him at first sight. Their families were acquainted, but their connection transcended convention. From the very beginning, there was magic between them. Willy soon discovered that Colette was no ordinary country girl. Her love letters revealed not only her elegance but also a brilliant, untamed mind. She was no empty vase, no fragile ornament. She was a woman of spirit, bursting with untold stories. At 34, Willy married Colette, who was just 20. To introduce her to Parisian high society, he took her to grand banquets and opulent salons. But Paris, in all its gilded glamour, was unkind. The elite whispered and sneered, dismissing the girl in her modest gown as an outsider, a rustic beauty unfit for their dazzling circle. At those gatherings, Colette felt like a gilded turtle, torn from its grassy fields and imprisoned on a jade platter as nothing more than an ornament. Willy's presence was her only solace, the one familiar face in a world that refused to accept her. Marriage turned Colette into Willy's loyal messenger. Tied to their home and chained to his work, she spent her days penning replies to letters, her own voice lost in a flood of dictated words. In his sweet murmurings, Colette surrendered to the gilded cage of her marriage. Until one day, an anonymous letter shattered the illusion. Willy's infidelity came to light. He confessed casually, shrugging it off as a Parisian man's privilege. "They're women of ill repute," he said, "not worth a thought." Paris, it seemed, turned a blind eye to such sins. To Colette, Paris itself became as debased as the men who roamed its salons. Young and disillusioned, she fled to her mother's arms. Seeking answers, she found none but a hard truth. Trust no one but yourself. If marriage does not adapt to you, then you must adapt marriage to yourself. Divorce was unthinkable. So Colette returned, determined to forge her own rules. She agreed to stay with Willy, but on her terms. No more lies, no more illusions. Willy could have his lovers, but so could she. More importantly, she would no longer serve as his assistant. She demanded a role in his literary life, no longer content to stand in his shadow. Thus began their unconventional, open marriage. Willy's fortunes faltered soon after. Facing financial ruin, he found himself unable to pay writers and staff. Desperate, he turned to the one person he had always underestimated. Colette, the woman who had written him such poetic love letters, now became his lifeline. With his urging and thinly veiled coercion, Colette began writing. Her pen poured forth stories of her countryside youth, each word imbued with love, nostalgia, and raw honesty. Willy dismissed her work. "It's too soft, too feminine. No plot, no tension. It'll never sell." His critique stung, a harsh slap against her growing confidence. But when her words reached others, when a countess at a salon praised her writing, Colette's light began to shine. Willy seethed with jealousy. "That greasy count must be after you," he sneered. Colette smiled coolly and replied, "You're jealous of the wrong person. I'm interested in the countess." In Colette's attraction to women, Willy saw a goldmine of inspiration. If he couldn't control her passions, he could at least exploit them. Encouraging her to add provocative scenes to her stories, Willy transformed Colette into his star author, a secret weapon he kept hidden behind his name. Colette's debut novel, Claudine at School, was a roaring success. Paris devoured it like wildfire. The book, published under Willy's name, became a cultural phenomenon. Everywhere Colette went, she saw her words in strangers' hands. Her husband, basking in the praise, grew larger than life in the eyes of the public.
I believe Willy based Claudine in part on your school days.
Yes, I think I had a little something to contribute.
Well, I'm very glad your experiences have borne such wonderful fruit.
Colette said nothing, but the weight of her silence pressed down on her heart. When she finally confronted Willy about claiming her work, he snapped, "Do you want to ruin us? The truth will only destroy you." Trapped by love, by circumstance, Colette swallowed her pride once more. To appease her, Willy bought her a countryside villa, a glittering cage disguised as freedom. Colette poured herself into the house, turning it into a sanctuary, but her writing stalled. Furious, Willy locked her in a study, demanding she produce pages before she could leave. Under his unrelenting pressure, Colette delivered again. Claudine in Paris was born, and Paris adored her creation. Parks, cafes, and drawing rooms filled with readers clutching the novel. eager to discuss its bold, risque content. The fame brought new faces into their lives. Madame G, the vivacious wife of an arms dealer, swept into Colette's world like a summer storm. Their connection was electric, impossible to deny.
Well, the invitation was clearly meant for you.
Should I?
Yes, of course.
Willie, ever the opportunist, encouraged Colette's affair, knowing it would fuel her writing. He visited Madame G himself, unable to resist her charms. Together, husband and wife wove a silent pact, sharing lovers and secrets in a life that was both shocking and strangely harmonious. For a time, the arrangement held. By day, Colette explored love with Madame G. By night, Willie followed suit. Their marriage was no longer a prison but a stage for their tangled passions. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of escaping. The triangle could not last forever. When it was finally exposed, it brought with it the scandal that would forever alter their lives. Enraged and resolute, Colette turned the messy love triangle into art. Her novels captured the scandal in thinly disguised prose, stirring Parisian imaginations and fueling endless speculation. People saw their own lives reflected in her words, whispering about the parallels to the real arms dealer and Madame G. The humiliation became too great to ignore. Madame G lashed out, both threatening Colette and destroying copies of the books by fire in a desperate bid to erase the evidence. But Colette was unshaken. She had already tasted rebellion, and if one publisher fell, she would simply rise again with another. Her defiance turned Claudine into a literary phenomenon. Across France, readers embraced the sharp wit and raw honesty of her work. Willie, ever the opportunist, expanded his ambitions, adapting Claudine into a stage production that promised even greater fame. During auditions, a girl with a razor-sharp bob haircut seized their attention. Her name was Chipette, and her bold hairstyle was an anomaly in Paris. Willie's sharp instincts sensed a promotional goldmine. He urged Colette to adopt the same haircut, creating a sensational twin narrative that captured headlines and curiosity. The strategy paid off spectacularly. The Claudine stage play dazzled audiences, and the character became a cultural obsession. Claudine was everywhere, on posters, in salons, on the lips of every fashionable Parisian. Colette herself became Claudine, her image synonymous with the character she had created. Advertisements bore her face, brands clamored to use the name, and young women across France copied Claudine's distinctive look. The success was dizzying. Paris, that gilded city of dreams and vices, seemed to dance to Willie's tune. Beautiful women, lavish salons, and untold stories were his for the taking, or so he believed. Colette, always in the shadows, allowed it for a time. After all, women in the spotlight were rare. Hiding behind her husband's fame felt like the natural order of things. And wasn't she free? Free to take lovers, free to explore the glitzy world Paris offered her. She thought this life would always be enough. Then she met Missy. Missy wore tailored suits and carried herself with a grace and strength that stopped Colette in her tracks. For the first time, Colette felt seen. Missy was unlike anyone she had known. Bold, independent, and unshakably herself. A true gentleman, though born a woman. Their connection was electric, and love quickly followed. Missy's keen eye pierced through the illusion of Colette's life. "You're not free," she told her. "You're his pet, dressed up for display. Your leash may be longer, but it's still a leash." The words stung because they were true. Missy urged her to reclaim herself, not as Willie's creation, not as Claudine, but as Colette. After all, wasn't Claudine hers? She had written it, shaped it, given it life. Willie, sensing the shift, lashed out. The idea that a woman could demand authorship offended his pride. "I've given you everything," he argued. "Fame, fortune, freedom. What more could you want?" But something in Colette had changed. She no longer cared for his validation, no longer sought to please him. Writing had become a hollow exercise, and she yearned for something more. Theater became her salvation. She threw herself into pantomime, rehearsing tirelessly, pushing boundaries both on stage and off. When the curtain finally rose, Paris gasped. Colette's bare body moved with untamed freedom, her performance shocking and seductive. The climax came as she kissed Missy, fully and passionately, under the glaring lights. Outrage erupted. Conservative spectators hurled insults and trash at the stage, scandalized by her audacity. But Colette stood tall amid the chaos. If Paris could not accept her, she would simply leave. As Colette pursued her theatrical dreams abroad, Willie's life crumbled. His debts spiraled out of control, his gambling habits consuming what little remained of their fortune. Desperate, he auctioned off their countryside villa, the one symbol of happiness Colette had ever clung to. The betrayal was the final blow. Colette saw, with furious clarity, the truth of her marriage. She had spent years supporting a man who was nothing more than a reckless gambler. She had built him an empire, and he had left her with nothing. But she was done. Taking Missy's advice, Colette left Willie behind and embarked on a triumphant international tour. Under the spotlight, she finally stepped out of Claudine's shadow and embraced her true self. When she returned briefly to Paris, she visited the ruined countryside villa. Among the debris, she found a crystal glass ball, a long-forgotten gift from Willie. Its surface, once pristine, was cracked and dull, worn down by time. For a fleeting moment, nostalgia tugged at her heart. Could she really leave behind everything they had shared? Reality shattered the illusion once more. A former publisher revealed that Willie, in his desperation, had sold all future rights to Claudine for a paltry 5,000 francs, without her knowledge. Furious, Colette confronted him. Willie, shameless as ever, shrugged. "You can always write more, my dear." The words were a final insult. Claudine had been her blood, her soul, and her voice. The life she had poured into those pages was now gone, just like her marriage. A cruel joke played at her expense. But Colette was no longer a victim. She filed for divorce and fought to reclaim what was hers. Through the courts, she secured the rights to the Claudine series. At last, Colette stepped into her own light. She became one of France's most celebrated female writers, a woman who had fought for her voice, her name, and her freedom. The dazzling girl who had once written to please others had finally found herself. The fog of her past lifted, and she stood beneath a sky that belonged to her alone, bathed in the radiant light of her triumph.